Hello, everybody.
Welcome.
Yeah, hi.
To our monthly Facebook live stream.
Today's topic is so-called crazy wisdom. You could substitute in energetic wisdom. You could substitute in innocent wisdom. And the reason for this is because the ego, that's you and me and everybody else, is fundamentally and absolutely alone. We're born alone, we live alone, we die alone, and inside the ego of our own minds, we are alone. And because of that, we are separate, we are divided, we are insecure, we're vulnerable, we're in a universe way too big for one little ego to manage. And because of that, it's traumatized. So you can say perhaps that the ego doesn't get traumatized. You could say perhaps that the ego is the trauma. So in that sense, as egos, we're all suffering or struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder. So therefore, you need some energetic energy and some energetic mind states to break through that, to the other side of that, which is a sense of unity.
So what does that look like with crazy wisdom?
Well, with crazy wisdom, you need to embrace a technology or a methodology that helps you break through the isolation of the ego's trauma and to enter into this altered field, which is by definition bliss, clarity, non-clinging. But because the ego is traumatized, it doesn't want to do it. It wants to stay comfortable or safe inside its separation, and at the same time, it feels separate and isolated. So that's kind of the dilemma.
Right. The nature of the ego is to settle into some sort of status quo, and the nature of breakthrough is really revolutionary, which is where the crazy part comes from. And so if we want to transcend the ego on our spiritual path, on our path to spiritual enlightenment, then that's going to require some breaking through status quo, and that's certainly going to appear crazy to somebody.
Right.
Maybe to our own egos.
To our own self, in a way. So in a sense, we all live on one side of the wall in our egos, and this transcendent thing, this Christ consciousness, Buddha nature, whatever, is
divine union.
Divine union is on the other side of the wall. And whenever you come up against the wall, you go, no, 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 I can't go over that wall. And so the crazy wisdom or the energetic wisdom is actually, as Trungpa said, recovering the innocent mind, the vulnerable mind, the open mind, the trusting mind. And the ego has a big problem doing that.
Not every tradition embraces crazy wisdom. It's kind of a special feature of Vajrayana, or also known as Tantrayana, which we see in Tibetan Buddhism and in Shingon in Japanese Buddhism. And our spiritual tradition really embraces what we're calling here crazy wisdom. It's also called divine madness. And it's this spontaneity, it's this sort of like a Rinzai Zen koan. What is the sound of one hand clapping? It's these ways of speaking or ways of being that our ego just can't fix, that our ego just can't get a grasp on. And therefore we have to move beyond this everyday status quo reality and consciousness and break through ourselves into something that's beyond that. And we know that the universe, that the cosmos is not limited to just the rationale that our ego knows. That we know that that is tiny in comparison to the wonder and the wisdom of the cosmos. And that's something that crazy wisdom or divine madness gives us a taste of, is that wide open spaciousness of possibility. And that, our friends, is an essential element of what we call spiritual liberation. Yay.
Yay. Just so, just so. So from the point of view of the ego, it's crazy wisdom. From the point of view of the ego, it's energetic intervention or whatever. From the point of view of the ego, it's a struggle or difficulty or scary or fearful.
That's certainly involved.
But from the point of view of the transcendental, it's no such thing. It's spacious, it's clear, it's open, it's lovely.
It's freedom.
And so the technology that is involved is developed by different teachings, and the beauty of the Vajrayana practice, Tantrayana practice, is that it actually embraces that as a methodology. And so in order to make this transformation or this change, we probably have to have a ladder. We need tools, we need methods. And so our online course, which starts in September, four talks on this, are about these things. Different methodologies or different approaches that we have to meet this issue. So, from the point of view of the ego, it works on some very strong powers that are holding it in place, and this is called the shadow. These are areas of our psyche that we have pushed out of the way or underneath in order to get along with our egos in the world. What should we say about the shadow?
Oh, there's so much to say about the shadow. Well, the shadow is really probably the biggest single drawdown on our vitality. It's parts of our ego that are usually not so nice, that we'd rather not look at, that we expend a ton of energy hiding away, even from ourselves. And naturally we try to hide these from other people too, but those ones are not, those aspects of the shadow are not as tricky as the ones that we don't even know exist ourselves. Those are the ones that can really get us into hot water, because they can show up under times of stress or when we're least expecting it, and really cause some problems in our relationships or in our lives in general, in our professions. So in this teaching, we spend a lot of time integrating the shadow, and there's a real alchemy to that. This is sort of the shit of our psyche, and we can really upcycle that. We can compost it, and there's a lot of hidden talents there, there's a lot of hidden skills, there's a lot of hidden virtues there, because through getting to know our own shadow, we develop, for example, enormous amounts of compassion for other people when their shadow is showing, so to speak, because we know what it's like.
So why do we have a shadow? What's the reason the shadow is there? Well, the ego works on three very basic principles for its survival. One is resources, obviously you need to eat. And the other is identity, who I am as a person, and sexuality is a big part of that. And the third one is the ego always wants to feel it's in power or in control. It's in control of its own destiny, and so it should. That's what an ego is for. But these three issues, resources, money, identity, sexuality, family, relationships, and so on. Power and control, which is about independence or self-direction, have to at the same time blend in with our society at large. So we have this, and our families. So we have this kind of double whammy situation where we want to be able to go with our natural feelings about it, and then we also have to fit in with the group. And so the struggle sends some feelings and some ideas about it into the unconscious, and that's the shadow.
This is a real conundrum. How can I entertain my control freak tendencies on a planet with 7 billion other people, right? That's a real challenge. And so that drives a lot of our desires, for example, our desires to be in control, into our shadow. And we say, me? No, I don't need to be in control. I don't mind. But this is what the ego wants. The ego feels vulnerable, so it feels like it always needs to be in control, as one example. So that's how power issues, using this example, that's one way that power issues get driven into the shadow.
Yeah. And when you're in a situation where the ego feels threatened or challenged or vulnerable, it's going to revert to its program in terms of these three topics: money, sex, and power, as a place to hold on and grasp onto, which puts you solidly on the struggle side of the wall. So to meet the energetic transformation of those things into the sense that the universe is giving you everything you've ever had, therefore there is no shortage, that your identity is whatever you put on, whatever you make up, and there is no inherent correct or right identity to have, and therefore your self-image isn't so important. And when you realize that the whole system together is in control, and that we honor that, for instance, say in biomimicry or nature's processes, that we don't need that much control most of the time, then it makes it much easier to enter into that surrender, which makes it curiously almost, what's the word, contradictorily or a paradox, that the more you let go and the more you surrender into this other side of the wall, actually the more resources, the clearer the sense of identity and the clearer the sense of control is in terms of your own being, and therefore in your community.
The more security you feel.
And more security you feel.
Yeah.
And it's a kind of a paradox in a way.
Yeah. So we feel these topics are just absolutely essential for spiritual liberation for sure, and a happy life in general. And that's why we're offering these 4 classes online about these topics next month, September. And we also write at some length on these topics in our book, Wasteland to Pure Land. And you can learn more at planetdharma.com. You can learn more about our book on the landing page and check out the course on the schedule menu.
Correct. And it's not just negatives. It's like a large part of the spiritual life is people attempting to get into a good, clear space. And the thing is they don't really have to work at that, actually, because that is there naturally underneath the ego's surface. So what the spiritual life focuses a lot on is the negatives, how to get rid of the greed or the anger or the confusion and so on. And part of the problem, from our point of view, is that this is not all of humanity's task. It's not all of humanity's task to remove the negatives. It's also to explore the positives. But as long as the ego is in control, the negatives always have kind of an overweighted power or control of this. So by letting that go, we encourage the ego to explore its positives, which is exploration, discovery, experimentation, curiosity, engagement, and a sense of trust that the universe isn't going to blow up if my ego gets threatened.
That's really true. And there's so much joy in that. At our retreat center, Clear Sky, I think I discover a new plant, at least a new plant every year. I discovered a new, this year, a mushroom that looks like a flower. It was really quite amazing. So to make that space and that peace of mind, to create that spaciousness in our lives that we can make the time for enjoying that and have the wherewithal to see the things that are beneath our feet as we're walking is a kind of one of the gifts of the spiritual life and of this work.
Right. And the mystery and the wonder is around you all the time. One of our members just discovered a new bird that had been seen in the eastern Kootenays, which is where we are, the other day. So there's always these new potential clarities and understandings. Returning to the crazy wisdom, then, it's a question of, we don't have to find the positive or the wholesome or the imaginative or the creative. That is our natural state. But what we do have to do is knock out the blocks that keep our wheels spinning in the air. And one of them is the way our Western ego is very much rewarded and honored for its successes. So every small child learns by the time they're in grade 3 that they're in a competitive market. And so from a very early age, our family is competing with the family next door. And so this whole sense that the ego, and by extension the nuclear family, and by extension your company and your corporation, are all competing against each other, which is fair enough and true in some ways, isn't the whole picture. There's another picture going on that is more cooperative and engaging. And so here again at Clear Sky, we're trying to undertake the 4 bottom lines to restore this sense of cooperation, environmental and social and economic and spiritual integration, generative way of being. It's part of what we do to meet the opposite side of crazy wisdom is bright, shiny, sane wisdom.
Absolutely. So at our retreat center, Clear Sky, here in the British Columbia Rockies, we are really making efforts to provide models for potential alternatives. And it's a day-to-day experiment, speaking of joy and exploration and challenges, and it gives us it's kind of our dojo for all of the challenges, all our shadow elements kick up. We use crazy wisdom as much as we can to break through these perceived barriers that we have and explore these alternatives to the competitive capitalist model or consumeristic model, and show how we can really have a much better time working together and stepping out of the paradigms that have been handed to us. We don't have to live the way that we were. We can take the best of what we were brought up with, and the things that we don't care for, we can invent alternatives. So we encourage you to come and check it out and be a part of the great experiment.
Yep.
Here at Clear Sky. You can learn more at Clear Sky's website, clearskycenter.org.
So, one of the ways, yes, one of the ways that, and a very powerful way that we hold this whole thing in place is through communication. And communication is based on my language, and my language is based on my parents, and by extension, my community and society and so on. And the communication in Western terms is very much I-focused. I did this, I'm going to do that, I am this, and then by extension, identifying Catherine as mine and me as hers, it becomes a we.
my partner in this case, or my co-teacher.
And then my kids, my family, and my tribe, working its way out. So the communication aspect structures around the language, and the language in English anyway is noun, subject, verb. So it's very much a dichotomy in the language that separates and divides, which is wonderful for naming birds and species of mushrooms.
Right, classification.
Classification and communication. It's a wonderful, wonderful tool. But from the point of view of the ego, it's also an isolator. So that what you think you're going through and what you think you're experiencing, you think is just you. You don't see that you're in a group of people who are all probably at some point or other having the same feelings and the same thoughts and the same ideas and the same sensations about all sorts of things. But because of the language, we feel that separation, which is in that sense artificial.
And this is somewhat unique. Not every language has this. So if we look at English as an example, English was a language invented or developed for commercial and military conquest. And as Sensei said, it's very linear, it's subject-object oriented, so it has a built-in, what Buddhist philosophy we call duality. If you have subject-object, then you've got this polarization from the very roots of your language. And not every language has this. Chinese, for example, does not have this. And for many years, I read the Heart Sutra in English and could not make heads or tails of it. And then I got a book with translations and read it in Chinese, and it made a lot more sense, because in Chinese it doesn't have the subject-object linear orientation. It's a much rounder, fluid kind of form of expression. And then the meaning becomes much more clear.
So
this is one of the reasons why we embrace a planetary consciousness.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
It's not the purview of any particular kind of people or socioeconomic class or elite or educated people. It's really a union consciousness of, and that's why we call ourselves Planet Dharma.
So on that,
we should be Cosmic Dharma.
Yes, Cosmic Dharma. Well, planetary
Why
is a good
limit
start.
ourselves to the planet?
So you could say in some ways that English is prose and Chinese is poetry. And so you could also in some ways make that association between this side of the wall, which is the struggle side of the ego, the prose side, and the other side of the wall, which is the transcendent side, which is more poetry. So if you're a very analytical, structured, economic, mechanical, scientific kind of person, which most of us in the West are, by the way we work and function, you could say the problem that we're stuck with is that we're just doing prose all the time, when in fact the transcendent side is dismissed as poetry, which has no economic or mechanical or scientific value. You can't bake bread with prose particularly, or poetry. So you might want to think that way as well, that the shadow also holds itself by its definitions and its language. Like, what is my sexual identity? So now in the modern age, we're talking a lot about alphabet people, like the LGBTQ and so on. And so by extending the non-fixed labels about our resources, or about our identity, or about our power and control, we are in a sense also allowing ourselves to let go of the prose side and have a more poetic relationship to our identities, which would be a very useful thing for community if not a great thing, for fixing the tractor.
For fixing the what?
Tractor. For that, you want pros. Although there's a poetry
The
element in that.
mechanical aspect,
There's
right?
a poetry element.
And this is another reason why it's so valuable to be exposed to diverse cultures and why we really embrace a planetary view. Because if we look at the world's traditions, there are other cultures that embrace numerous different kinds of so-called gender or manifestations of sexual orientation. And that's a part of their culture, and they believe that to be natural. Was it islands in Indonesia
I was gonna ask
have
you.
7, I think?
7? Thai has 3 that I know of.
At least.
At least 3.
Yeah, and an indigenous tribe in North America has 5.
5.
And so it's excellent to be exposed to these different kinds of paradigms as opportunities to reflect on them and expand our own way of thinking, which can get really quite small in such a vast universe.
So returning to the idea of crazy wisdom for a minute, the teaching speaks about 2 inherent problems. One is conflicting emotions and the other is primitive views. So using what we've been talking about so far, you could say that fixed I language is a primitive view. It's holding reality in a very useful and functional but small box.
It is a small box.
And then the emotional conflict we suffer from this small box is because we identify so much with the small box, we're in emotional conflict almost all the time because we see other as a challenge or a threat or an interruption to the I moment. And so the crazy wisdom is simply to bring your attention, to the analytical wisdom is, the energetic wisdom is simply to bring your attention to what is already going on in your being and that you don't really acknowledge because it seems so much like just being me. And we say, okay, look, it's a wider picture. And the ego goes, no, thank you, it's scary out there.
It's hard to defend our little me box all by ourselves. So to take on
That's
more
true,
feels
yeah.
even more frightening.
Right. So by relaxing your issue about resources rather than my money, often people will talk to us about some of their problems, and people are much more revealing about their sexual issues than they are about their economic issues, because economics, money, is more fundamentally important than sexuality. So you can see how the secrecy or the containment gets closer the deeper you get to the ego's sense of separation. So in community businesses and so on, you have mutual support resource-wise, and in kind of more loosely defined relationships, then you have more support there, and therefore your control and power is shared and there's not so much weight coming down on you.
Right, not so much stress on such a small number of people.
Exactly.
We really embrace working with money, sex, and power in our teaching. Those are shorthand for all of the issues around the first 3 chakras. The first chakra in the perineum being about survival issues, and the second in the hara issue, or the abdomen, being about identity, relationships, and as part of that, sexuality. And then in the solar plexus, issues around power, control, and manipulation. And the thing about these 3, these are these are intensely sticky, hairy issues, no pun intended, but these things can get complicated. And the thing is, we really need to just dive in there and sort through these things and bring light and clarity and spaciousness to all of these issues and health to these first 3 chakras if we want to move up and be able to live from the heart and be able to really fully access our intuition and our relationship with the cosmos, with the divine consciousness. We can't operate healthfully from these upper chakras unless the first 3 are really stable and healthy themselves. So this is really indispensable and outstanding foundational work that we can all do, and it takes courage. It takes courage and some
determination.
Perseverance.
Yeah. So when we speak about, and so when we speak about the shadow, we're not talking about some evil power. Mostly what we're talking about is an unconscious relationship to these issues. We're unconscious about our sense of resources. We just kind of go out and try to get the money to be alive and to take care of ourselves, but we're unconscious of the stress that comes from the idea that we are resource independent, or I am just solely responsible for my resources. And the same thing then when it comes to relationship or community or communication, which is that second sexual identity. It's like my any feelings or desires I have that don't fit into the mainstream have to be pushed into the unconscious lest I get rejected. And money and control, or money and then sexuality and identity, about that. And then the control issue is about, well, if I'm not in control, I'm losing. If I'm not in charge, I'm annihilated or defeated, rather than there's a moment. If I'm not in control,
I'm relaxing.
rather than if I'm not in control, I'm relaxing. And I have a moment coming up next. So that sense that, okay, well, now it's that, and then it's this, and then it's the other. It doesn't have to be me all the time. Should we see if there's any questions?
Yes, let's see if there's any questions. And I'd like to encourage people to, if these topics interest you, join us for our online course in September.
Yeah.
And you can learn more about that at planetdharma.com. Look at the schedule. And we also explore all these topics in our book, our awesome book, Wasteland to Pure Land. And you can learn more about that on our website too, or just buy it on Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Yes.
I guess my question is, what comes up, if you're not in control, it's like my parents' voice, right? If you're not in control of your own life, then no one else is going to be take care of you, right?
Yes.
So you've got to be super in control and take care of things. And
and that's true.
Yeah.
In the current structure of society, that's a true statement.
If you're going to live in the prevailing paradigm.
Yeah, that paradigm, that's true. So it's a very true statement.
So is the kind of letting go for transcendence, that kind of letting go, does that really then require community, would you say, so that you have that support to let go? Because could you let go, say, in the mainstream paradigm, really?
Extremely difficult. That's a very good question,
It is
Cara.
a great question.
And in fact, it's extremely difficult to do it on your own. Almost everybody who is awakened has awakened through some kind of paradigm. St. Francis, in spite of Christianity. And in a way, you can say the Buddha awakened in spite of Buddhism. So the traditions are there to provide a raft and a support, but they're not an end in itself. It's a way of supporting and fostering the ability to surrender. And when one person surrenders, they surrender into totality. But the methodology is, in a sense, bridges that wall. So if, say, for instance, in Buddhism, it starts on this side of the wall, but it leads you over to the other side of the wall. But the idea is once you cross over to the other side of the wall, you don't need so much the support of that tradition. However, in order to support and live it in the community and to embrace it in a more worldwide spectrum, which would be better for humanity itself, including the environment, then you need community, and you need strong community, because the law of large numbers is that it's very hard to do anything on your own anymore. It involves community to do something, and so community then gives you the support to help other people to do it. Otherwise, you got to go get a job.
Yeah, it's a great question, Cara, and there's two layers to that question, and of course I agree with everything that Sensei said, and I think I'm just saying what you said in a different way, but spiritual awakening is an interesting thing. It really comes down to the individual. It's the individual that takes the steps to spiritual unfoldment, and only the individual can do that. And in that sense, it's kind of the ultimate in self-determination. And on the other hand, boy, it sure helps if there's a lot of support and role models, and our support from other people can really speed up the process and make it less intimidating as well. And so there's this kind of back and forth between the role of the individual and the role of the community, and that's always true, I think. And I just get super jazzed in the second level of that question. I think most of us know that capitalism pretty much sucks and isn't working, and is putting us on a path that is not looking promising in the future, and we can say the same for consumerism. And so I get very excited about creating alternatives to that. I'm not waiting for someone for a government or some global or national organization to present me with the solution, but I get very excited about trying to create solutions. And it's a big challenge, and it is a lot of fun. It is a great adventure.
Definitely. It's also important to remember that even people who you think didn't have a community, like say Buddha or Jesus Christ, in fact did. Buddha had a community of wanderers and ascetics like himself. And he went from teacher to teacher and engaged in different communities on his process. And Jesus did the same thing. Jesus was part of an ancient tradition of wandering around and trying to discover what life is about before work became so tied into work you couldn't think. And we don't know what Jesus did before 30, but there's some talk he was studying with other teachers in other places.
In Kashmir.
Supposedly, yeah.
Perhaps.
Anyway, yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Two more questions here. One from Maureen. She said, I'm wondering what other words you might use rather than crazy, or what you'd suggest when speaking about this wisdom to others.
I would call it sane wisdom. But then what you're going to do is you end up in the same problem, Maureen, because then what happens is that if that is sane wisdom, what is my normal day-to-day? By definition, it is? Crazy. So to tell people they're crazy, which is what the Buddha basically said, all pathogenas, all normal people are crazy. To tell everybody they're crazy isn't a good start point. But to say we need to use some craziness to make you better or more healthy is skillful. What was the second question?
I think, sorry, I had to reflect there for a moment. I think if we go back to Kara's question, where her parents are caring about their offspring and wanting to give good advice and wanting them to do well in life and be safe, right? And have a promising future, and that's very much within the predominant paradigm. So it does seem kind of crazy to step outside that paradigm. I don't want that status quo life, and every person who's chosen to have a more self-determination knows that everyone around them, the family and friends you grew up with, are going to think that's kind of crazy. And so we all have a sense that that is actually somehow more sane than the prevailing paradigm, which is a really kind of unhealthy consensual reality, with of course the best of intentions. So I think, you need a little bit of time to explain what we mean by crazy. You know, it looks crazy, but as Sensei indicated, it's actually far more sane. Yeah, definitely. And another way to put it is basically like, do you fit in or not? So if the average person fits into the paradigm that we're currently in, the current model, then you have religion. Religion is just a basically set of rules about how to live in community. But if you don't fit in, or you don't feel that you feel there's something missing in your world, then by their standards you feel crazy, or they think you're crazy. So when at least a bit odd.
A bit odd, anyway. And so if you don't fit in, or you don't want to fit in, or you can't fit in, then you have to give up religion and take up spirituality. And spirituality, by definition, is religion with a ladder to the other side of the wall. Religion by itself will not take you to the other side of the wall, but with a ladder of a bit of challenge or exploration or courage, that ladder takes you to spirituality.
What's the wall again?
The wall is the ego's fear or the ego's terror of transcending its own separation and isolation.
Right, which keeps us in those little boxes.
You had a second question?
Yeah, this one's from Mecca.
Mecca.
Hi, Mecca.
Mecca the person or Mecca the place?
Mecca the person, I guess. She says, how do you communicate in higher self to people who are in bully mode, especially as someone they see as controllable for being kind or female or spiritual, or whatever they see as weakness from their perspective?
Yes.
How do we become enlightened when there is a disbelief in the spiritual, or when we are told that science is separate, that we're separate, and that we must be crazy to be following anything of a spiritual nature? Well, the brief answer...
That's a few questions, right?
The brief answer for me is you need different friends. And you need to find a different community, and you need to be dialoguing with different people. And you can't tell somebody who's up to their neck in alligators that your plan is to drain the swamp because they're too busy with alligators. So my short suggestion for such a long question is find a community and find people around you and work with them. And for the mainstream, just keep your focus contained in your spiritual life, keep that contained within yourself, and work within the paradigm, the normal paradigm, according to the rules of that paradigm. So give unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and let them worry about that, and you get on with it somewhere else.
Yeah, I'd agree, Mika. It's a great question, and this is where spiritual community can be so valuable, because there is a real learning curve about how to respond skillfully to unwholesome states or unwholesome actions. And the nature of unwholesome states in action is that they can catch us off guard, or they can come in with the force of nature, like a cyclone, and we're kind of caught off balance, and it can be challenging to know how to respond in the moment. So it's great to be around other people who have experience doing that and see what they do under those kinds of conditions. That they certainly arise in any community, including spiritual communities, so we can see, how different people handle it, and that was really skillful. And we can also ask questions. This happened to me, and what could I have done that would have been more skillful?
Yeah.
And we make extensive use of that living here in community at Clear Sky. That's for sure it's a tremendous resource, and that's why spiritual community is considered one of the triple gems.
Right, absolutely. And perhaps just to correct a possible error that might be creeping in, it's not an us and them dialogue. It's a bit like fruit on a tree. So this side of the wall, the struggling people, and this side of the wall, the awakening people, is not an us and them dichotomy. The important thing to remember is it's like fruit on a tree, that this fruit is ready to fall. So if you're a fruit picker, you go out and you go, I can pick this fruit, and I can pick that fruit, and I can pick this fruit. These are people who are already either involved or seeking or working to awaken. And this one is not yet ready, or this one's not yet ripe, so we wait. So it's not an us and them dialogue, it's a ready or not ready dialogue. I think an important point to remember.
That is a very important point. Here at Clear Sky, this part of the world is world renowned for hunting. And so there's a lot of hunters in this community, so it's really a gun culture. And I'm not from that. Well, actually, I am from a gun culture.
I think so.
My mother's a crack shot.
United States.
And I'm from the U.S. But I have not handled a gun myself, and
I have.
not. That's not something that. I try to reduce that in my world, and so it's Sensei's point about it not being either or is so great, because when we meet hunters, the best thing that I love focusing on is what we share. Is we share a love of wildlife, and we share an appreciation of the importance of healthy habitat, and we can have really wonderful connections based on that, and promote the health in those values, and if we came at it from what our differences are, then we could really just fall into conflict very easily.
Well, absolutely. Thank you for joining us. Don't forget about the online courses. It's starting in September. You can find out about that on our webpage, which we've mentioned.
PlanetDharma.com.
Also, we do office hours, which is a question and answer every 2 weeks. The next one is on this Sunday, but you have to register for that. You can do that online. And you can come and ask questions or hear other people's questions and participate in that. That's about an hour every second Sunday. And we run retreats regularly, and there's places here to meditate if you want to do solo retreats. So please check us out. We look forward to meeting you. And thanks for listening today for myself and...
Thanks for joining.
John.
Look forward to seeing you again.
Yeah.
And may all our efforts benefit all beings.